researching St. Louis Germans in the Civil War. So our objectives this evening, actually going to take my video off. Okay, our objectives this evening are to understand the history of the beginning of the war in St. Louis and the impact of German immigrants. We're also going to discover ways to identify and research German soldier ancestors using a case study. If you have pre-Civil War German immigrants to St. Louis, there is certainly a chance that they participated in the Civil War. So definitely listen closely to all the places that you can go and look and see if you can find their name. Okay, little bit of history to start us off here. So first of all, Missouri settlers. Well, they weren't originally German. In the early 1800s, you have settlers coming to Missouri, but they were from the South. They were from Virginia. They were from Kentucky. They were from Tennessee. So those were the first people who came and settled in Missouri. Many of these people, well, let's go. Of course, we had French fur traders in St. Louis, that of course before that. But as far as the bulk of the land in Missouri. So many of these people were wealthy landowners. They were also slaveholders. They were attracted by the fertile land along the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. In fact, this area was called Little Dixie because so many Southerners had settled there. So Missouri entered the Union in 1821, as most of us know, as a part of the Missouri Compromise. Missouri came into the Union as a slave state. Maine came in as a free state, so it maintained the balance of power there. But by about the mid-1800s, you have German immigrants coming to Missouri in large numbers. Some went to rural areas along the rivers where those Southerners had settled. Others went to the fast-growing, bustling city of St. Louis. So fast forward a little bit to 1860. So in 1860, there were 1.2 million residents in the state of Missouri. There were 115,000 enslaved people. Again, this is in 1860. So about 1 in 8 families in the state held slaves. And of the slave-owning families, there were about 540 who owned more than 20 slaves. This is just to kind of give you a little background as to what the state looked like. In St. Louis, there were 160,773 residents, and there were 1,542 enslaved people in the city of St. Louis. So far, fewer, obviously, for just in the city. So Missouri, bottom line, was technically a slave state, but it was not typical. You're not going to see the numbers as you would in North Carolina or South Carolina or Georgia or Virginia. Missouri was a divided state, and St. Louis was a divided city. The Germans who had moved in the mid-1800s tended to side with the Union. They wanted a strong national state. They had an aversion to slavery, and they were eager to display patriotism. Most of them were abolitionists to the core. But the earlier Anglo settlers, those Southern immigrants, or I guess we could call them migrants because they migrated from the east a little further west, but they tended to be Southern sympathizers. They had those larger farms. They were the enslavers. Also, along with many state leaders, because that's who elected a lot of the Missouri state leaders. But these Anglo settlers would soon begin to clash with the thousands of pro-Union St. Louis German immigrants who had come to the big city. So let's talk about those St. Louis Germans. Well, the Germans, when they came to St. Louis, they quickly began to establish a strong cultural identity. They founded German language clubs, newspapers, organizations. That's one of the German papers in St. Louis. This is a picture of a Turner's Club. So if you've done any German genealogy or your German history, you know that there were Turner's Clubs and other types of organizations like that Germans participated in. Some of these immigrants were also 48ers. So these people were highly educated. They were progressive, and in some cases, they were former military leaders of the failed revolutions of 1848, where you had a lot of people rising up all over Europe, not just Germany. And in this case, they were failed revolutions. So a lot of those Germans came over here. So these Germans also started to speak out at pro-union rallies. They wrote about anti-slavery causes, and they joined paramilitary type organizations, a lot of which operated out of these Turner's clubs. One of these early organizations was called the Wide Awakes. The Wide Awakes was an organized paramilitary group formed under the guidance of Francis P. Blair, not a German, but a friend of Abraham Lincoln, in reaction to the heated political opposition faced by the Republican or the anti-slavery party. It served as a counterforce to hecklers who disrupted meetings and rallies. So there's a picture there of Francis P. Blair. So a lot of these Germans in these type organizations, like I mentioned, they met for their military drills in the Turner halls. Many were recruited by a man named Franz Siegel, and that was the person in the mentioned in the song that was playing at the beginning. Now, that particular song called "I Goes to Fight mit Siegel" was actually a sort of a tongue-in-cheek song that was written not by a German, but sort of poking fun at Germans who joined and fought in the Civil War. But this is the gentleman that it was talking about, Franz Siegel. He was a former German army officer. He was a 48er, and he recruited a lot of Germans to the Union side. Okay, on the other side, so we have these paramilitary type organizations. We have the Wide Awakes on the Union side. Again, the war hasn't started yet. And then on the other side, we have the Minutemen. They were in St. Louis. They were made up of Southern sympathizers. They headquartered at the Berthold Mansion, and which was downtown at the time. And they were formed again to combat the influence of the Wide Awakes. So as you can see, no war is breaking out yet, but the sides are lining up and the tensions are mounting. So war begins. Again, not in St. Louis, but the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter on April 12th, 1861. Lincoln, shortly after that, on April 15th, put out a call for troops requiring Missouri to provide 4 regiments or 2,972 men. But the Missouri governor at the time, Claiborne Fox Jackson, who was a Southern sympathizer, he refused this call from Lincoln. So what happened was German forces who were already kind of semi-organized started actually organizing into regiments. This was an unprecedented move going around the governor of the state. When all was said and done, it provided the Union side well over what Lincoln had asked for. The first regiment was organized on April 21st, and others followed shortly. There were 5 volunteer infantry and 5 reserve regiments formed within about a month. All of these were taken into federal service. So let's take a look at these regiments that were formed. So the Missouri Volunteer Infantry, again, a lot of Germans, although not all. So I want to show you the different regiments in the infantry as well as in the reserves. I want to show you kind of the breakdown of what these looked like. So the first regiment was under the command of Colonel Francis Blair. There were about 1,200 soldiers, and 48 of those were German. The second regiment was led by Henry Bornstein, who was the editor of another one of the big German papers in St. Louis. They had about 1,200 soldiers. 97% of that regiment was German. The third regiment was led by Franz Siegel of the song fame. 1,400 soldiers, all of whom were German. The 4th Regiment, led by Nicholas Schuttner, about 1,000 soldiers, 88% of them were German. And the 5th Regiment, led by Charles Solomon, 700 soldiers, 65% German. So again, these were all formed right after the war started, and you can see how much German participation there was. So if we look at the reserves, or they were also called the Home Guard, there were 5 regiments of the United States Reserve Corps formed, created specifically for St. Louis to accommodate the overabundance of volunteers. So many of these Germans were signing up. They didn't need them in those infantry regiments anymore, so they created this Reserve Corps. These were mostly 3-month enlistments. So these were definitely a shorter enlistment. Some of them then re-enlisted and some of them didn't. But in this one, so the 1st Regiment of this Reserve Corps, led by Henry Olmsted, about 1,200 soldiers, 94% of them were German, 6% were Bohemian. And I mentioned the Bohemian numbers on these because even though they're not exactly German, they would have been, probably living with, and not necessarily living with, but living near, and have, similar culture, similar heritage. So I kind of am putting them sort of in there with the Germans. And they were mostly from Ward 1, which is the southern part of the city. They were mostly laborers. The 2nd Regiment, Herman Coleman, 700, 92% German, 8% Bohemian. And those soldiers lived mostly around Soulard and the Choteau area. The 3rd Regiment, led by John McNeil, about 1,000 soldiers. It was about 75% German. The 4th Regiment, led by B. Gratz Brown, 1,000 soldiers and 75% German. These men came mostly from the northwest area of downtown. And then the 5th Regiment was led by Charles Stiefel. It had 1,100 soldiers, 83% of whom were German, and they came from Ward 10, which was the northern part of the city, and they were mostly laborers. There's a book where I got all of these statistics that I'm going to show you in just a little while. Okay, so we've got these Germans. They've formed into these regiments. So now we have the Camp Jackson affair. So this is going to sort of put these regiments to the test a little bit. So both sides coveted St. Louis with its strategic location and military posts. Governor Jackson wanted to pull Missouri out of the Union and planned to take the weapons from the St. Louis Arsenal, which was located in South St. Louis, including 40,000 rifles and muskets. He requested heavy artillery from the Confederate President Jefferson Davis, and in the meantime, ordered the state militia or the state guard, which were his troops, to muster nearby. The place where they mustered was named Camp Jackson, named for the governor, was established by Brigadier General Daniel Frost on May 6th with about 700 men. This was actually located in Lindell's Grove at the time, just outside of the city. Nathaniel Lyon, who was the Union commander at the St. Louis Arsenal, was suspicious of this camp and believed an attack would come. On May 10th, he marched his Army of the West, backed up by the United States Reserve Corps, to the camp. Lyon's overwhelming numbers forced Frost's surrender, and his soldiers were placed under arrest. Now, the reason why this is called the Camp Jackson affair is mostly this part, because that part there was no bloodshed with that. But as they marched the soldiers under guard from the camp to the arsenal, secessionists lining the road began shouting things like, "Damn the Dutch," and throwing rocks at the Union soldiers. Gunfire broke out, and in the end, 5 soldiers and 28 civilians were killed. This tipped off days of unrest in the city, but in the end, the city and ultimately the state of Missouri would be firmly in Union hands. So let's talk a little bit about the rest of the war in Missouri. This is not, of course, before battles continued all over Missouri. And many of the Missouri soldiers, many of these Germans fought elsewhere in the war, were sent elsewhere to fight. Missouri actually saw more than 1,200 engagements between 1861 and 1865. There were battles and skirmishes all over the state. There was a lot of guerrilla warfare, which you've probably heard about that. Missouri, believe it or not, was third only to Virginia and Tennessee in the number of battles fought within her borders. But I will say we didn't have necessarily the big battles in Missouri. They were literally a lot of skirmishes and things like that, where you had definitely smaller numbers on each side. Now, you did have some larger battles. There was one in Springfield that is pretty famous, but near Springfield, Missouri. But generally, you had a lot of these smaller skirmishes. Okay, let's go back to the importance of that German participation. So Missouri had the highest percentage of German Union Army participation of any state. Even though Missouri ranked 6th in population, it was 2nd in the number of German troops it furnished. This is a kind of a really interesting statistic. Of the 88,000 German-born males in Missouri, 30,000, almost 31,000 fought in the Union Army, so almost 35%. And many of them, of course, made up these regiments from St. Louis. This is a quote by Ulysses S. Grant that he wrote later on, but he said, "By the way, there was some splendid work done in Missouri, and especially St. Louis, in the earliest days of the war, which people have now almost forgotten. If St. Louis had been captured by the rebels, this would have made a great difference in our war. It would have been a terrible task to have recaptured St. Louis, one of the most difficult that could have been given to any military man. Instead of a campaign before Vicksburg, it would have been a campaign before St. Louis." And definitely the Germans, are the ones to thank for a lot of that. So let's do the math on those statistics for those German regiments. So that was over 9,000 St. Louis German enlistees. These 9,000 men would have left many, many descendants, which is why I say if you have a German who was in St. Louis before the Civil War and was of age, you definitely want to check some of these sources that I'm going to give you in just a few minutes here to see if they did participate in the Civil War. All right. So in this case, we're going to use as an example, a Frederick Sherman. So first, we're going to talk about him just as a German immigrant. So this is a 4-generation chart. This is actually my grandfather. And then this is Frederick Sherman right here. So he would actually be my 3 times great-grandfather. So when I first started learning about him and doing his genealogy, I really thought he had an interesting story, and I really thought that I could share this with other people so that you would know where to look to see if you could find something similar for an ancestor of yours. So I do want to mention that not all of the websites that I used to research him were forgiving with misspelled names. Now, we know Ancestry is pretty good about giving you close matches. Some of the other ones do as well. But some of these other sites will not. So I wanted to show you, these are all of the ways that I have seen his name spelled in these records. So just be aware that when you're searching these Germans, you may need to try different name variations. So you can see it's close, but definitely some letters off. We've got some initials and that sort of thing. Okay, so I started researching him, and of course, his immigration would have been his earliest record here in the United States. I found his passenger list on Ancestry. Here he is right here, coming to the United States. I find his marriage in the St. Louis civil marriage records on Family Search, and here he is. He married in 1850, not 1950, 1850. And you can see that right here. His wife was Catherine Wilhelmina Charlotte Brunner. And so there's his marriage. 1860 census. So this is, of course, before the Civil War starts, but here he is. He's a laborer. He's living with his wife, Mina for short, and 3 of their children. Joanna is the one of their the child who I am descended from. And then as I was going a little further on Ancestry, this is the 1880 census, but I looked down in the suggested records and I saw that they were linking him with a U.S. Civil War pension index file. So I thought, well, that is pretty interesting. Let's take a look at that. So here it is here. And let's take a closer look at the index card. And here it is. So we have Frederick W. Sherman. We have his widow, Wilhelmina. We have his regiment and company. We have when this widow's pension was filed, and we have the application number. So all of those are going to be important as we research him. And I do want to mention he also has another service here. I have never been able to find any information about him specifically and this military service. So I'm thinking there may have been another person out there with a similar name, and it's somehow ended up on this particular pension card. Okay, so let's take a look at Frederick Sherman, the soldier. So these are all different places that you can look to see if your ancestor's name appears in any lists of soldiers and to find a little bit more about what they did. So let's look at that service card again, and let's zero in on his regiment here. So basically what this is saying is that he was in the 5th Regiment, Company G, because your regiment is going to be a number, your company is usually going to be a letter. United States Reserve Corps, Missouri Infantry. So that was definitely one of those ones that was formed really early on. Okay, what are some online resources that you can use to find your soldier's name? Well, Fold 3 is an easy one to use. So I went on Fold 3 and I did a search for his name. Now, again, you may have to try some different variations, but I found him under this name in Fold 3. And we have multiple Frederick Shermans. So I did go ahead and filter over here for Civil War Union and Missouri. And I found this person here, which looked to be him because it says 5th U.S. Reserve Corps. And when I click on this, what this is his compiled service record. So since he was only in for 3 months, he doesn't have a whole lot of paperwork, but he does have a card, like an envelope, and he does have 2 cards, one which talks about him mustering in and then mustering out. So I did find those on Fold 3. So that would, of course, be proof that he was definitely involved in the Civil War. For any of the databases that I mentioned on here, you can use those through the St. Louis County Library. So if you go to our website and you put in Fold 3, and then you make sure and check that from catalog to website, and you can go right to Fold 3, put in your library card number, and you can actually use Fold 3 from home, or you can come into any of our branches and use it there as well. And if you're watching this from afar, you might check with your local library to see if they have access to these databases like Fold 3. So another one that is actually free to go to, you don't have to go through the library, is Missouri Digital Heritage. That's the place where you may recognize it from getting death certificates or maybe naturalizations. But they also have a Soldiers Records 1812 to World War I section. And if you go to that, you can search the Soldiers Records database. And I found him under a different spelling, but Frederick Sherman. And here he is listed right here in the 5th Regiment of the U.S. Reserve Corps. If I click on him, it gives me not much new information. If I view the record, it's basically just another card which states his service. But what you can do here is you can click here for the 5th Regiment, and you can actually see a list of all of the soldiers. They're going to be in alphabetical order, though. So the companies are going to be all mixed up, but you can see a list, if you wanted to see if there were other maybe brothers, cousins, or, other relations who were also enlisted. Another neat thing that Missouri Digital Heritage has, if you're just interested in Civil War history, if you click here on Civil War and then on the Divided Loyalties exhibit, it will take you here and it says St. Louis Area Civil War Digitization Project. So if you just, like I said, are wanting, historical information, documents, things like that, you can click there. And, so appropriate that it's called the Divided Loyalties exhibit because it truly its people had divided loyalties. The National Park Service Soldiers and Sailors Database is another place you can go to see if your ancestor is listed. So for this one, you're going to go to People and then Soldiers and Sailors Database, and then I'm going to Soldiers, and I can search again for Frederick Sherman. And here he is. There's obviously another Frederick Sherman who was from Iowa because he keeps popping up. But this looks like it's mine here, 5th Regiment. And if I click on him, again, not a whole lot of new information, but this website allows me to click on the regiment. And then it takes me to a little bit more information about what they did. So it does say 5th Regiment, U.S. Reserve Corps, Missouri Infantry, 3-month enlistment, 1861. And if we blow this up just a little bit here, it gives a little bit of information about what they did. So it says they were organized at St. Louis, May 11th, attached to Lyon's Army of the West, riot at 5th and Market Streets, St. Louis. So that was sort of a smaller version of what happened when the soldiers were marching back from Camp Jackson. These Germans were actually who had just formed this regiment were walking to get arms from the arsenal, and sort of a riot broke out, people calling them names, people throwing rocks. They did duty at St. Louis. Then some of the companies moved to Jefferson City. The regiment moved to Boonville, then to Lexington. It says between Glasgow and Boonville, Blue Mills, Brunswick, and they mustered out on August 31st. And then it also says regiment lost during service, 6 enlisted men killed and 11 by disease. So total of 17. So that was really interesting when I saw that. It's starting to bring sort of his experience to life a little bit. So what do we have as far as print materials? Well, we have got a lot of print materials here at the library at the Emerson History and Genealogy Center. One that I really recommend is the Union Cause in St. Louis in 1861. So if you're close by the library, you can definitely check those websites. But if you want to come into the library, this particular book by Robert Raumbauer actually has lists of all of these regiments that were formed in St. Louis in 1861. So you could look through this book to try to find your person or people. And this is where I got the little statistics about how many Germans in each of those regiments. So in Company G, in the 5th Regiment, I do see Fred Sherman here listed. This book is also online, so you actually don't even have to come to the library. It's on Internet Archive, and I believe it's also at the Library of Congress, so you can look through it that way too. But if you like holding a physical book, we have it here, and we also, I believe, have a circulating copy. So if you want to check it out and take it home, you can do that. Another set that we have is a set of Civil War records by Kenneth Wendt. This is a blue set of books. And again, these go through and they list all of the soldiers in particular regiments. And this one is not online, but I do see him here in the Company G of the 5th United States Reserve Corps, Private Frederick Sherman right there. And then another one, as we start to, now we want to know more about what he experienced. So this is a compendium of the War of the Rebellion by Frederick Dyer. This book is at the Emerson History and Genealogy Center. It is also online. These books are out of copyright, so they've been digitized and they are online. But in this book, I found some more information about this skirmish in Brunswick that was mentioned earlier on August 17th. It says 5th Reserve Corps, Union loss, 1 killed, 7 wounded. So there, that was a skirmish, and definitely there was a loss there. So again, this is on the Library of Congress, so you can view this online. Another one that we have, this one is not online, it's just at the library, supplement to the official records of the Union and Confederate armies. So this was a really great one because this one went into the most detail about what his regiment and company did. So here we have Company G right here. And if we blow this up a little bit more, we see that August 16th started for St. Louis, Missouri on August 16th on the steamboat Augustus McDowell. The 17th through 19th was fired upon below Glasgow by secessionists from the riverbanks, supposed to have been 1,500 mounted men. Firing commenced at 8 o'clock a.m. and ceased at 2 o'clock p.m. Met Iowa troops on steamers, New War Eagle and Iatan above Jefferson City. Arrived at Jefferson City August 17th, remained there, then started for St. Louis, arrived here Monday, August 19th, and remained there in St. Louis barracks on duty until mustered out of service. So that's the most information that we've now gotten, as far as what actually they saw. Another great one that we have is the Civil War in St. Louis, a guided tour. This one is at the Emerson History and Genealogy Center. This is by William Winter, and this really details what happened in those very first few days, and in particular with the Camp Jackson affair. So this book has a map where they show you the routes of the different regiments in those early formed ones and where they were coming at Camp Jackson from. The 5th Regiment, however, is right here. And the 5th Reserves, because they were the last one to form, they were not yet armed and they were not yet organized for service. So they sat it out at Stiefel's Brewery, the sort of de facto headquarters of the 5th Reserves, because Stiefel was the leader. So they were hanging out at the brewery, not yet ready for action. So some other sources that you can look at to really bring your ancestors' experience to life are newspapers. So newspapers.com, you can access that through the library. Be careful when you're searching for articles in the newspaper about the Civil War, though, because the term Civil War was not yet in use. So if you want to find articles about your ancestor or their regiment and what they did, use words like War of the Rebellion or War between the States or secessionists, because those are the terms that would have been used at the time. To find some articles about Frederick Sherman, I used the terms Stiefel, 5th Regiment, Brunswick, and Home Guard. And I was able to find some interesting articles by using those. And I'm going to show you what I found. So this was an advertisement from the German paper calling on men who wanted to enlist to come and do so. So it was sort of a call to come and enlist. This is an article from the Daily Missouri Republican on May 12th, and this talks about the incident that was mentioned at 6th and Walnut, or 5th and Walnut in some places, but it says at about 5:30 in the evening, a large body of the German Home Guards entered the city through 5th Street from the Arsenal, where they had been enlisted during the day and furnished with arms. Large crowds collected to witness their march, and they passed unmolested along until they reached Walnut, when they turned up that street and proceeded westward. Large crowds were collected on these corners, booed and hissed as the companies passed. One man standing on the steps of the church fired a revolver into the ranks. A soldier fell dead, then 2 more shots were fired from the windows of a house nearby, and so on. So that was, kind of started off with a literal bang, I guess you could say. This article was in the Westliche Post, which is another St. Louis German paper, August 28th. So right after they mustered out. And I'm not going to read this whole thing in German, but if you look closely, you'll see Boonville, you'll see Brunswick. This was an article talking about what that regiment was involved in as they were making their way back to St. Louis. Okay, another thing that you can use, another tool that you can use to kind of bring your ancestor service to life are maps. So fire insurance maps, we do have access to through the library. It's called FIMO. You can look for that on our website. And then Google Maps I used as well. So one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to find out more about this Stiefel's Brewery, because that's where they had all gone. I wanted to find out, what did that look like? Was that a big brewery? I mean, it looks like it from the picture. So I looked it up on the fire insurance maps. Here it is right here, the kind of turquoise color there. This is what it looks like today. It's obviously no longer there. It's long been since torn down. But I kind of wanted to, see, well, how big was that brewery? What did it look like? So also using Google Maps, I wanted to know exactly what was at the spot where that riot occurred at 5th and 6th and Walnut. Actually, it is Ballpark Village. So that is what is there where that originally happened. And then I also made a Google map of all of the places where they saw action. So we have Boonville, we have Glasgow, we have Brunswick, we have Lexington, and we have Blue Mills. And so I just thought that was a good visual to see that they had gone along the river and they were encountering these Southern sympathizers. Another great thing that you can use is memoirs, diaries, and letters. Now, chances are you're not going to find a diary for your particular ancestor, but you might find, that some of these kind of portray what they would have felt. So this is a book that we have here at the Emerson Center called Germans in the Civil War, The Letters They Wrote Home. And just to show you a few examples, this particular soldier was writing about his experience, and he said, you'll probably want to know how it was on my war campaign and where we were. On September the 9th, we went to Wentzville, and then from there to Flint Hill, where we gave the Secesh a good going over. On the 12th, we went from there to Warrenton. So this soldier is describing all of their movements out west in St. Charles County and further. Down here, he talks about on October 15th, we came home. The entire time we got nothing from the government but a couple of barrels of crackers and some coffee. All the rest, like horses and all our equipment, except for our clothing, we had to take from the Secesh, again, secessionists, because there was no other way to get anything. Another thing that you may find for your ancestor is a unit history. Now, these smaller volunteer regiments, these reserve corps, I don't think there are any on them, but for the larger ones you might find. So this is a unit history for the 24th Missouri Volunteer Infantry or the Lion Legion. This was not actually organized out of St. Louis, but if you look in a book like this, you can find all kinds of details about what they encountered, that particular regiment. Another good place to look for information is in county histories. So your soldier moved, in my case, he moved throughout Missouri. So a lot of the counties in the section on the shelves will have a county history. In this case, we're looking at a Boone County, Missouri book, and it talks in here, whoops, went too fast, but there's a whole page about incidents of the Civil War in Columbia and Boone County. So you might find a detail of an event that your ancestor was in one of these books. So for any of these books, if you want to search our catalog, you're going to want to use this right here. Leave the toggle on catalog, and then you can put in, the name of the book you're looking for or the county, if you're looking for a county history or something like that. Okay. Another thing that you can look at is there was an organization called the Grand Army of the Republic. And this was the largest association of Union Civil War veterans. On the Missouri Historical Society's website, they do have an index for this, for the St. Louis area. So you could put your ancestor in there and see if he was possibly a part of this. Mine was not, but you never know. So let's go back to Frederick Sherman and let's see what happened to him after the war. So he did not reenlist, as far as I can tell. Like I said, that other service, I believe that was a different person. Fighting had been difficult for these 3-month reserves. As you could kind of tell in that one book, they were not well supplied. Some were wary of serving in mixed ethnic regiments if they re-enlisted. They were very comfortable with these regiments because, as you saw the percentages, they were with their friends, they were with their countrymen, they were with other people who spoke their language. So a lot of them were a little wary about continuing on and being in mixed regiments. Also, some of these men were older. They needed to get back to their families. In Frederick's case, he was almost 40 years old, which, certainly isn't old by standards now or then. But in that particular war, in that particular time, that would have definitely been a little older than average. He actually passed away. This is the St. Louis Death Register found on Ancestry Library Edition. He passed away in 1885, had bronchitis. So there he is right there, F.W. Sherman. He did have an obituary in the German paper, one of them, the Westliche Post, and that was found on newspapers.com. So he did have that. And his wife is on the 1890 veteran schedule because, as you know, the 1890 federal census, the regular census, was destroyed, but the veteran schedule was not. So here is his spouse here, and she says that she is a widow of a soldier. Let's go back to this pension application. There's an application number here. So what I wanted to find was her Civil War pension. Now, you may find on Fold 3 that they do have a section called Civil War Widows Pensions, but it also says that it's 21% complete. I actually think now it says 22% complete. I don't know if this will ever be complete on Fold 3. So if you do see that you have a widow's pension associated with your soldier, that would have been after he passed, she would have applied for that. You can actually request that from the National Archives. So you go to Veteran Service Records and you can request that. It is $80, I believe, but you would get all of the documents associated with that application. I actually did this for this veteran. I got about 30 pages of items. I don't have them in this presentation, but it's definitely worth it to do that. There's also on Family Search, there's also a Civil War pension index. So if you go to Family Search and you go to search and then catalog, and then if you put in Civil War pensions, of course, FamilySearch.org is free to use. You just have to have an account. Oops, sorry about that. And you can search, this is United States Civil War and later pension index, 1861 to 1917. This would be soldier's name, application number, certificate number, and regiment in which the soldier served. So that's something that you can check out for possible pension information as well. If it doesn't come up on, pop up and as a suggested record on Ancestry, because they are on Ancestry, obviously, as well. Okay, for more information, we have an electronic newsletter here from the Emerson History and Genealogy Center, and we've done a couple of relatively recent articles on this topic. So if you search for passports, make sure you change that to website. You'll see that we have one from July 2019, which is basically a lot of the information in this presentation. But if you wanted to look back kind of at a recap, a lot of that is in here. We also had one the year before, 2018, Civil War Research Brings Ancestors to Life. So that may be helpful as well. I want to talk quickly about some locations and landmarks in St. Louis, particularly of the places that I mentioned in this presentation. So if you're a fan of the Civil War and if you live here locally and you're looking for something to do, you might want to take a ride around and look for these places, which are associated with, if you did have an ancestor who was a St. Louis German and did serve, or served, maybe they were not maybe you have somebody who was not a German and who was a Southern sympathizer. Either way, if you want to check out any of these places that we talked about, here they are. So the St. Louis Arsenal was actually located on the current National Geospatial Intelligence Agency site in South St. Louis. They are moving, I believe, to North St. Louis, but I don't know if they've moved yet. So on the left side, you see a sketch of the arsenal back in the 1860s. And then that is what the site on the right looks like today. There are still, now you can't get into this, so you can't, go and tour it or anything, but you can still see some of the old original buildings are in there with the new buildings as well. So Lyon Park, very near there, there is a 10-acre park that was established in 1869. It is near Anheuser-Busch. It is near the NGA. You can see the streets there, Arsenal, Broadway, Utah, and 2nd Streets. There is a park, and there's a baseball field, and there is a 28-foot tall obelisk, which is the Lion Monument. So something to recognize him. Francis Blair, who we talked about earlier, there is a statue of him in Forest Park at the corner of Lindell and Kings Highway, and there it is right there. There is also a statue of Franz Siegel. This is also in Forest Park. It is at Grand and Union, and the stone base reads, "To remind future generations of the heroism of the German-American patriots of St. Louis and vicinity in the Civil War of 1861 to 1865. The Berthold Mansion that I said was the headquarters for the Southern sympathizers, that was located on the site of the current Met Square building at Broadway and Pine. And Camp Jackson, site of the affair. Actually, I guess not the site of the affair, but where they took the Southern troops from. It was located on what is today part of the campus of SLU. So it would be the northeast corner of North Grand and Lindell Boulevards. You can see on the screen here, there is a drawing of it, and there's actually a photograph of it as well. And then this is where it would have been located back then. That's what it would look like today. So in conclusion, Germans were definitely an important part of the Civil War in St. Louis. I think Grant had it right with that quote. And there are great resources available to find out more about the war and if your ancestor was involved. So good luck finding and learning about your St. Louis Civil War ancestor. And I am going to go ahead and put my video back on and see if we have any questions. So if you do have any questions, now is the time to get those into the Q&A. Okay, so let's see. Someone said, thanks for your presentation. I have your ancestors in my tree at Ancestry. Well, I think that we are probably related then. And I will say, so the attendee mentions, if you are interested, I do have many of the church records from Germany for this family, as do I. But thank you for that. Luckily, the place in Germany where this family came from, the records are available for the church records. So, but I always say that when you're in St. Louis and when you have German ancestors, I have seen this many times in the library where people are working on lines where they're either from the same town, which means there's a good chance they're probably distantly related, or they're actually working on the same surname, because many of our St. Louis Germans came from the same places in Germany. There definitely were pipelines of immigration. So it's not uncommon to have that happen. So that's awesome. That's great. So someone said, what do you use to translate German documents to English? Well, it kind of depends on what the document is. There are a lot of German documents that you can really fumble your way through, even if you don't speak or read or write German. Mainly because you're looking for certain keywords. For example, if you're looking at church records, like we were just mentioning, there are words for a birth and for a death and for a marriage, and names will be obvious and dates will be obvious. So a lot of times you can kind of fumble your way through just by looking for those keywords. I will also say that I'm featuring in our next passports that's coming out in December a little blurb about Google Translate. So if you have a phone and you have Google Translate, it is getting really good. I mean, the example that I'm going to show in passports, I am in a German newspaper and I am holding my phone up with my Google Translate on right onto that obituary. And it does a pretty darn good job of translating that, even being in the printed Fraktur. So you might try that as well for your German translation. Okay, would St. Louis Germans have fought in other states? Yes, they would have. Depending on what unit they were assigned to, yes, they may have gone elsewhere. Mine did not, because he was just in that 3-month enlistment and he did not re-enlist. But yes, some of them definitely did. So let's see. Somebody said something went out and I think they missed part of it. So will this be available? We're planning to put this up on the library's YouTube channel. It'll be up in about a week and it will be up for 30 days. So you can view it there. So I'm not seeing any other questions. But I'm so glad you all tuned in tonight, and good luck. I hope that you go out and maybe try some of those databases or websites, or maybe come in and take a look at some of our books and possibly find your ancestors. I also forgot to mention that I did send out a handout for this presentation with links to a lot of the things that I talked about. If you did not receive that, check in your spam. And if you still don't see it, you can email us at genealogy@slcl.org and we will resend that. So thank you all so much. Good luck finding your Germans, and hopefully we'll see you researching in the library soon. And if you're tuned in from elsewhere, but you have St. Louis ancestors, good luck. A lot of these things were online, so I would, utilize those sources first. And also, we do have a lookup service here at the library. So if you did want to see one of the sources that we have here only, just in book form on our website, if you search for the word lookup, we do have a free lookup service. So if you tell us the book that you want us to look in, we can look in the index, see if your ancestor is there. And if so, we'll scan the pertinent information and send it to you. So thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful night, and